Hey everyone, welcome to today's high-density, syllabus-mapped explainer of the April 30, 2026 digest. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this material today. Now, this explainer is strictly designed to connect your dynamic current affairs directly to your static UPSC foundations without wasting a single second of your time. So, let's dive straight in. Today, we're going to be covering polity and rights, elections, IR, and the economy. A really fascinating health data paradox, and then we'll wrap up with a mains practice framework and a rapid-fire revision. All right, let's kick things off with Section 1, the democratic fabric, looking at polity, judiciary, and rights. Okay, so you need to watch out for a massive prelims trap hidden within a recent 125-page Supreme Court judgment on hate speech. Usually, when we hear the term hate speech, our brains immediately jump to an Article 19 freedom of speech issue, right? Well, the court actually took a different angle. They observed that hate speech stems from an us versus them binary, and critically, ruled that this binary violates the spirit of fraternity guaranteed in the preamble. So the focal point was actually the preamble, not Article 19. Plus, applying strict judicial restraint, the justices declined to direct the enactment of specific hate speech laws. They basically noted that courts simply cannot enter the exclusive legislative domain. Now, this exact nuance, this shift from fundamental rights to the overarching principle of fraternity, is exactly what UPSC examiners are going to look for to test your conceptual depth. And this theme of constitutional tension flows straight into the ongoing Sabarimala issue. The Supreme Court recently heard a petition from two women who had entered the shrine, and their response was pretty fascinating. The court explicitly stated it cannot reform faith. This presents a classic, fundamental clash of constitutional rights. On one hand, you've got Article 25 guaranteeing the freedom of religion and the right of denominations to manage their own affairs. But pushing directly against that is Article 14, demanding absolute equality before the law. It's a really intricate balancing act between individual rights and group religious practices, and it now rests with a massive 9-judge Constitution bench, which, if you remember, was formed following the original 5-4 verdict back in 2018. Understanding this progression is absolutely crucial for any GS2 answer on constitutional morality. Sticking with GS2 for a second, a fresh public interest litigation has sparked an incredibly important debate over SC/ST reservations. For your conceptual clarity, you absolutely must distinguish between two completely different legal concepts that people mix up all the time. The first is subclassification. The 2024 Devinder Singh ruling permitted states to perform this subclassification, which basically means legally directing benefits to the absolute most marginalized communities right there within the existing SC/ST list. The new PIL, however, seeks outright creamy layer exclusion. That means actively removing affluent individuals from reservation eligibility entirely. Confusing the internal shuffling of subclassification with the external removal of creamy layer exclusion in a mains answer is definitely going to cost you dearly. They are totally distinct constitutional mechanisms. To really anchor that modern legal debate, listen to this profound 1932 warning from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. He stated that excluding wealthy or educated untouchables is totally erroneous because economic progress and social emancipation travel on entirely different tracks. I mean, this isn't just historical trivia. You want to keep that quote in your primary arsenal. It provides the perfect conceptual depth to understand why the Supreme Court, in the recent Rohit Nathan case, struck down state criteria that used parental salary alone as the sole determinant for defining the creamy layer. Social backwardness, just as Ambedkar pointed out over 90 years ago, simply cannot be measured by a paycheck alone. Moving right along to Section 2, elections, analyzing trust deficits. Get this, a massive record was just set in the West Bengal Assembly elections, a stunning 92.9% combined turnout. That is literally the highest voter participation rate since independence. But was this a pure, unblemished democratic triumph? Not quite. As the source material points out, this incredible statistical milestone was heavily shadowed by severe administrative controversies that struck right at the very heart of our electoral machinery. So, what exactly went wrong? Well, the core of the controversy stems from a special intensive revision, or SIR, of the electoral rolls. This revision wiped out a staggering 11% of the electorate almost overnight, dropping the voter base from 7.66 crore down to 6.26 crore voters. Imagine the administrative chaos. This created a massive backlog of around 60 lakh names that were suddenly placed in this ambiguous adjudication status. The result? A severe systemic trust deficit between the state government and the Election Commission. This breakdown was so profound that it forced an extraordinary judicial intervention by the Supreme Court, who had to actually deploy judicial officers to review disputed cases. It is a really fascinating real-world study in the tension between the Election Commission's sweeping Article 324 powers and the absolute necessity of judicial oversight when institutional trust just collapses. Let's zoom out now for Section 3, IR and Economy, taking a look at the macro picture. With the Iran war escalating rapidly following the U.S.-Israeli strikes earlier in the year, Brent crude has spiked to an alarming $117 a barrel. And for India, our vulnerabilities in this geopolitical flashpoint are incredibly acute. Let's trace the geography of the crisis for a second. About 20% of all global oil passes through the narrow Strait of Hormuz, right? And India imports roughly 85% of its crude needs. But we have to look beyond just the immediate oil shock. This escalating crisis directly threatens the strategic international north-south transport corridor, and crucially, it jeopardizes India's primary gateway to Central Asia, the Chabahar port in Iran. We're essentially watching a simultaneous threat to our energy security and our long-term supply chain infrastructure. So how do we heavily buffer against these exact types of global geopolitical shocks? Well, India has been aggressively shifting its trade strategy. We've just signed our 8th free trade agreement in 3.5 years, this time a landmark deal with New Zealand. The strategic rationale here is crystal clear. Diversify our supply chains and systematically wean off our dependency on China, which currently accounts for an uncomfortable 16% of our total imports. And the negotiated terms? They're a major win for New Delhi. New Zealand has agreed to remove all goods tariffs immediately. More importantly, India strategically protected sensitive domestic sectors, crucially our massive livelihood-dependent dairy industry, while still securing a staggering $20 billion investment commitment. It's honestly a masterclass in balancing aggressive global integration with really careful domestic protectionism. Bringing it back home, let's look at Section 4, the domestic health paradox. Okay, you absolutely need to integrate this crucial, slightly wry paradox into your GS2 social justice answers regarding the National Statistical Office's 80th round data. Get this. Rural government health insurance coverage has successfully more than tripled, rising sharply from 12.9% to 45.5%. Basic logic says that out-of-pocket healthcare costs for these citizens should plummet, right? Well, paradoxically, they didn't. The median out-of-pocket expenditure per hospitalization actually doubled to 11,285 rupees. This highlights a massive systemic over-reliance on the private sector, where insurance coverage just isn't mitigating predatory pricing or ancillary costs. However, to be fair and show the complete picture, non-hospitalization care at public facilities has a median out-of-pocket expenditure of literally zero, proving definitively that the public system can and does deliver exceptionally well when it's adequately funded and utilized. All right, Section 5, Application and Retention for Mains and Prelims. Let's put this into practice. Take a look at this high-probability GS3 mains prompt based directly on India's evolving free trade agreement strategy that we just talked about. Analyze India's motivations behind signing the Indian-New Zealand FTA and assess how FTAs can help India achieve its goal of supply chain diversification while managing domestic sensitivities. Take a moment to think. How would you structure a comprehensive 250-word response to this under intense exam pressure? Here's how you can structure a top-tier answer by following a logical progression that hits every single examiner requirement. Start your intro with the broader context. State clearly that this is our 8th FTA in just 3.5 years. Note that while New Zealand's economy is roughly 1/16th the size of ours, the strategic signaling is immense. Then, explicitly state the macro motivations, post-COVID global de-risking, and the urgent need to wean off Chinese manufacturing imports. Next, dive into the specific key wins, like the zero tariffs on goods and the brilliant diplomatic protection of our vulnerable dairy sector. Finally, show the examiner you're a pragmatic thinker by concluding with realistic economic challenges, like overarching trade deficits and execution gaps in FTA implementation. Boom, that guarantees a multidimensional answer. Now let's lock in those critical data points with a rapid-fire revision, ensuring you have the exact metrics at your fingertips for those tricky prelims elimination rounds. Ready? First, the Supreme Court hate speech judgment specifically focused on the preamble's concept of fraternity, not just Article 19. Second, during that massive 92.9% turnout in West Bengal, the Election Commission seized an unprecedented 510 crore rupees in illicit inducements. On the economic front, the New Zealand economy is exactly 1/16th the size of India's, making this our 8th major recent trade pact. And critically for social issues, rural health insurance coverage now sits at 45.5%, even as the stark reality shows out-of-pocket hospitalization costs have inexplicably doubled. I want to leave you, the future civil servants of India, with these profound exact words from the Supreme Court. As long as the binary of us and them persists, true constitutional belonging will remain elusive. Considering the really complicated reservation debates and the severe election trust deficits we covered today, ask yourself, does true fraternity require us to eventually abandon these strict social and political classifications entirely? Or are they the uncomfortable but absolutely necessary stepping stones required to achieve baseline equality first? Ponder upon that and keep your focus sharp. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.
If you're ready to really practice all 8 mains questions from today's news, and you want to get your hands on prelims MCQs and detailed notes, go ahead and download the complete PDF. Just scan the QR code on your screen or use the link in the description to join our Telegram channel. Keep up the amazing work, stay consistent, and I will see you in the next explainer.